So my name's Eric Wittner. I'm the product manager for CityEngine, and I'm here with Pascal Mueller, the director of the R&D Center. And we wanted to talk to you today about creating rule packages for use really across the platform, and then basically give you an introduction to CGA. And Pascal's going to do a little a code challenge live for us and actually build some CGA on the fly and show us some of the functions and capabilities that's wrapped up in it. So what is CGA? CGA is computer-generated architecture. The agenda. So just I'm going to do a few quick slides on CityEngine. I assume all of you know what CityEngine is. How many of you are writing CGA? Okay, 3 people. That's pretty good. We would like to get you all writing CGA. It's not that hard. It's easy to dive into. So after I refresh on CityEngine, I'm going to show a little bit of using rule packages in ArcGIS Pro, show what they can do and how we're using them. Then we're going to go through a little overview of procedural modeling, what it is, what computer-generated architecture is, what rule packages are. Pascal is going to give us a little CGA 101 demo, as I mentioned. Then I'm going to talk about creating rule packages, sharing rule packages to ArcGIS Online, and then just touch on some tips and tricks that you should be aware of when you're creating rule packages for ArcGIS Pro, and we'll end with a Q&A. So CityEngine, of course, is a tool for generating 3D content, buildings, streetscapes, for inserting vegetation, creating park spaces. Came from the entertainment industry. We like the rules because they capture architectural style or streetscape style, and just by changing parameters, you can create a lot of different features and forms without having to do all that painful modeling. So it's a real time saver. It's like you build the rule once and then you reuse it in mass. And where we're seeing a lot of traction with this is in small landscape architecture firms who are capturing the styles of buildings they typically do in a rule set, and then using that to kind of pull the really heavy 3D modeling time out of their workflow, and they can do more iterations faster for their customers and create data much more quickly. So what is a rule package? A rule package is a set of computer-generated architecture, CGA, the language of CityEngine, and then assets, the assets that it touch. Those could be 3D models, those could be textures. And so those get wrapped together into what's called an RPK, and then they can be shared. When you create a rule package, you have a choice. You can make it open or you can make it closed. Open means someone else can open it up, look at the code you've written inside, use that as a base and a foundation. It's a nice way to share with other people what you're doing because they get everything they need, the rule and the assets, all in one form. But some people are developing rules and actually selling them and licensing them to people, so they don't want people to see the code that's inside there, so you can lock it down so that nobody can actually look inside. CGA is written inside CityEngine. There's an editor directly inside of it. It's the kind of best place because you get that immediate feedback when you're generating. There is no CGA editor in ArcGIS Pro, so CityEngine is the only place you can build that. The assets that are associated with a rule are referenced in folders, so actually when you package, it's going to go and search those folders and find the assets that are related to the rule inside those and grab them. So there's a lot of functions in CGA that allow you to pick random assets. So if you have a folder filled with terabytes of assets and you have a random function that's picking one of those, when you package it, it's going to try and pick all of those. So a great example was Singapore had a rule that referenced their Collada library of every single building in Singapore, and then they tried to turn it into an RPK, and I think it came out something insane like 72 gigs on the back end, kind of not super usable. So it's just something you have to be aware of when you're packing things up. And as I mentioned, it can be locked or unlocked. What can they do? They can be used as a content creation tool. In CityEngine, that's the primary use. You take some simple 2D data, a streetscape, a footprint, or a parcel, and you generate something out of it. But they also have a lot of functions that you can use for kind of alternative purposes. So one example is we have a function called conform normals that looks at a 3D model and makes sure that all the normals are correct, the faces are facing outside. You can actually wrap that in a rule package and use it in ArcGIS Pro to clean up data as part of a geoprocessing workflow. The other thing we use it for a lot is analytics. So CityEngine is really good at splitting things into pieces iteratively. So taking a set of buildings and splitting them into panels and then into sample points and being able to use that in a line of sight analysis is a good example of an analytic workflow. And then in ArcGIS Pro, within symbology, you can use the rule directly as a type of symbol to create a 3D view. So multiple ways to use it. So I'm actually going to show some rule packages in action in ArcGIS Pro. Okay, so this is ArcGIS Pro. What I have is a design. This design was submitted by an architecture firm. It was a piece of CAD, 2D data with a bunch of annotation on it telling me what kind of building was there and how tall that building was. So the orange buildings are commercial, the orange with yellow dots are commercial with residential on top, blue is office. Blue with yellow dots is office with the residential on top. Gray ones are parking, the yellow ones are residential. And then around it they had just a hardscape park area, walkways, etc. So I want to turn this into a set of 3D models. So I'm going to copy this and paste it into my scene. It gets dropped in automatically as 2D data. I can copy that. I'm going to drop it into, oh wait, and then I'm going to paste it in twice because I want to leave the, so I'm going to drag it up into the 3D side and then open the symbology. So kind of classic ESRI symbology interface. I'm going to go to a single symbol because I want to apply one rule to everything. If I wanted to, I could actually apply a different rule per unique value renderer or a different rule per range. So anytime you see that you have a unique symbol, you can associate a rule with it. Typically what we do is we author one rule for everything, and the rule itself handles kind of the uniqueness of the features. But you know, there's different approaches. So I'm going to open the properties of the symbol. This is inside symbology, right? There's different ways of creating representations. You can add new symbol layers. So I'm going to add a procedural symbol layer. I'm actually going to get rid of the old ones. And if I switch back, I can see I have a procedural layer. Right now it's unassigned and it's wanting me to select a rule. So I click rule, go into the folder. Which rule? It's gray blocks, so it looks kind of boring. There we go. So I've assigned a procedural rule to it. The parameters of the rule are exposed here in this window. What it does is it reaches out and it looks at the geodatabase. If it finds any field that matches a parameter, it automatically associates those two things together and creates the link for you. If you want, though, you can actually go in and manually assign it to a field that you specifically want to have it point to. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit apply. And I get a bunch of 3D buildings. So it's found the appropriate height field, right, and is giving me a simple representation of graded floors in all these buildings. Now, as I associate more and more fields with that, I can change what's being displayed here, right? So in this case, I've now linked up the textures the window size, the roof type, the roof texture, right? And created kind of a much more compelling symbol for each one of these buildings. And these are live and responsive. So if I actually start editing, let's grab one of these buildings, all right? And open its attributes. Okay, so this is a 9-story building. So let's make this a much more drastic 15-story building. All right, so the instant I committed those edits, it's pushing the feature back out to the procedural runtime. Procedural runtime is using the CGA to generate a new building, and then I get a new feature live on the screen. So you can use it interactively with editing. The other thing is it will honor, if I go to create, let's see, I have a bunch of feature editing templates in here that I've already created. And these feature editing templates have preset attributes associated with these buildings. So if I create a new feature, so let's create an office tower here. Right. That's going to be a really, really big office tower. 16 stories, right? So let's clear my selection. So there, I've created a new office tower feature. So you can use it interactively in editing, not just in symbology. So this is one way. This is the symbology approach to using procedural in ArcGIS Pro. I wanted to show you an example of using it in an analytical workflow. Okay, so I'm looking here. This is the town of Clarksville, across from Louisville. This green space we're looking at in the middle is a newly proposed development. One of the things they're concerned about is basically as they develop, views to downtown Louisville on the other side of the river are considered an amenity. So they want to measure that. So we have a couple tools that do, we have line of sight, we have skyline, et cetera, that can do some of this analysis. But there's a challenge when you're measuring visibility. You need to have a regularly sampled backdrop that you're creating your line of sights to. If you split a building, and you imagine if you're looking at a building at an oblique angle, the one that's more perpendicular to you is going to have the points spread wider than the one that's more parallel to your field of view. So if you were just to generate line of sights and calculate visibility based on that, you'd bias all the things that are more oblique to you. They get extra counted. So what you need to do is create a flat surface and then regularly sample it. So what I've done is created a little model that does that. So I'm going to walk you through that. The first thing is I have a model here that just does a skyline. So I have building footprints that are extruded. I have new design footprints which are extruded. I have 3D buildings for Louisville, which we actually got out of GetMap data and CityEngine, and then exported as multi-patches and brought in. So I'm merging those into a single set of buildings. Then on that single set of buildings, I do a skyline analysis, and then I generate a skyline barrier. This is just kind of a generic skyline model. And what I've done is I've brought that whole model here into a second model. So I'm going to run that. And as long as we don't see any red, I'll be really happy. Okay. So there's our skyline. Let's make it transparent so we can see through it. Drop down. So you can see the red line in the distance, that's our skyline. We turned it into a barrier. We're pushing that barrier far beyond the buildings for analytical reasons, which will become obvious in a second. The next step was, I need that flat surface that I need to be able to sample. It's not, well, flat is the wrong term. It needs to be a surface that's equidistant from me, the observer. It's a sphere. And we have a tool called Buffer3D, which creates spheres. So I'm gonna buffer my observer point and then intersect that barrier with the skyline, and the barrier with a sphere, and actually get this kind of representation of what the profile looks like. So let's take a look at that. Turn off these two. So there in the distance is a flat surface showing the prominence of buildings from my observer. Okay, I can turn that into a multi-patch with layer 3D to feature class, but I need to sample it somehow. So one of the ways that procedural is exposed is in a geoprocessing tool called feature from CityEngine rule. You specify an input. It could be a polygon, it could be a multi-patch feature. Interestingly enough, in ArcGIS Pro, they support points as an input to procedural, which we don't do in CityEngine. We treat points as basically 3-point triangles, as polygons. So there's a variety of stuff you can push in. You associate a rule package with it. It's going to take rule package again. It's going to look at that data and see, are there any attributes that match what I need? And then it's going to create outputs. And the default output is a multi-patch feature. But there's this option called export leaf files. So some rules can create multiple types of geometries. So I'm doing a rule called panelize multi-patch. It takes a multi-patch feature and splits it into a bunch of panels. For every single panel, it gives you a line along the bottom edge and a height. Then it gives you a point in the center of the panel, and then it gives you a multi-patch for each panel. So the reason why we do this is you can create an observer to create a line of sight to that point. You can measure whether it can or cannot see that point. Then you can associate that with the line or with the multi-patch feature to create a heat map or a color map with it. So I'm just going to run this rule. I should have been doing that while I was talking, probably. Thinking. Might have gone with less of a point density. So what it's doing is it's going building by actually not building by building, but every part of that profile and splitting the profile into points. And then from the observer, I can construct sight lines between my observer and those points, and then I can do a line of sight analysis when I drop in a proposed building to see if I'm going to wind up having conflict between those two. So I think I'm just going to let this chug, and then maybe we'll page back to it a little bit later after I've constructed some sight lines out of it. So that's how you can use rule packages in ArcGIS Pro. You can do symbology, you can use them as a foundation for analysis, for developing lines of sight, or for cleaning up geometry. You can share them to ArcGIS Online, and I'm going to show a little bit later searching for some rule packages and finding some of the ones that are out there already for you to use. You can consume them in ArcGIS with the features from CityEngine rule. Now, it used to be that you had to have a matching schema to get the fields to line up with the rule when you used it. At the last release of ArcGIS Pro, if you feed it a layer, it'll actually look in the symbology to how you've linked all the fields to those parameters and honor that when you run it. So now you have a WYSIWYG experience. So if you apply rule symbology, connect all your fields, you're looking at it, you run features from CityEngine rule, you're going to get the same field mapping and the same looking feature on the back end as a multi-patch feature. So that was a nice enhancement. You can consume them in ArcGIS Pro as symbology, and then you can also consume them in third-party apps. So rules are CGA, right? So they're actually kind of this procedural script. And kind of to introduce the concept of what CGA is, I'm going to turn it over to Pascal to take us through CGA 101.
Thank you. So yeah, so CGA, yeah, it means computer-generated architecture, and yeah, we can use it for procedural symbols, and basically, yeah, and technically it's a shape grammar programming language. So it's a shape grammar language. So it's a bit like a functional programming language, and where you can put basically pieces together to iteratively create more detail. It's a bit like playing Lego, where you put stuff together, and yeah. So our Lego piece is what we call a shape, and that means that's a scope. That's basically our bounding box, and inside there's a geometry. So it's all about like how is it oriented and what is the geometry inside, and then I can apply some operations on this stuff. So here, for example, here are some operations you can see. So for example, you can go and split stuff into, so you can take one shape and then split it into two or many, or you can take, for example, have an operations to take the sides of the split of the shape or offset. So it's really a lot of geometry functionality, 3D geometry functionality here. And I think this is also how you should see this as a tool for GP tools. Like this is one of the biggest libraries for processing 3D geometry. So you can just really use that also for basically any kind of, it's a bit like for those who know Seagull or something, but we're basically the Seagull for geometry processing. So when you have geometry processing problems with multi-patch, then very often you can write some GP tools and apply them to, for example, clean up your shapes in Pro or all these kind of things. So yeah. Then, so what's a rule? So it's basically a sequence of shape operations. That means you take a shape and then you say, okay, take now this shape, and then maybe move it a bit, scale it a bit, split it, and make two new shapes. Then the next rule takes these shapes again, and according to the rule, it then creates again something with these shapes. And so yeah, the challenge of this is, it's actually many people are scared of learning CGA, but it's actually pretty simple. I think the only problem is the very beginning, the concept of the functional language programming concept you need to understand. Once you have this, once it makes click, and I think this is when you're into scripting, very quickly it's like after one day you get it, like this whole shape thing. Then afterwards, your challenge is basically not so much anymore the technology. Of course, there are always limitations to the technology, but very often it's more like, okay, what am I gonna build with it? Like really, like what is the rule actually which people want? So it means, for example, when you talk to an architect or a zoning designer or a zoning planner, then you tell him, then he says like, yeah, there's this setback of 10 meters. Then you ask like, okay, is this setback of 10 meters? Where is it actually? Is it on the front or on the side? Or and he says like, yeah. Then he doesn't know the answer. He says like, yeah, we just do that, then we just do it somehow. And this is then exactly, so you really need to get to the as you start to ask the right questions actually. Like really, then they also start to think like, okay, fast setback of 10 meters to a major street. What happens on a round corner? It's kind of questions which then come up and where you have to think about, and where we have the tools to solve the stuff. So yeah, let's dive into it. So, gonna make the demo with the alpha version of the new CityEngine. It comes in like 2 months, 2017. So one of the new things is here our startup screen. So I'm going to start with an empty scene here. And I'm going to add a new rule. So I created now a rule, and then I go in here, I create here a parcel, and now on the left side you see that that's not a CGA editor. What I can do now here is can do extrude 10, save it, and now I go here and I assign a rule. This guy, I think. So now I have this guy here, which is 10 meters. So now what so it's very simple. So I have here the start rule lot, and my operation is an extrusion. That's it, very simple. So now what I can do is I add an attribute called height equals 10, and I replace this with this attribute here, and again I generate, looks the same. However, now I have here in my inspector, I got this attribute height here, and I can now change it to like here 70 meters. Or I could now go and select a source which drives this. So these are then exactly the attributes which you can connect to the fields which in Pro. So it means if you have data of any form. So for example, some geodatabases have for example the number of stories. So then you go in and say like, okay, then we make a rule for a number of stories, and then you can connect it there, and yeah. So it's really like basically whatever attribute you have, or some have the age of buildings, and then you want to make a rule for the age, and so all this you can do basically. So I'm going to show here some stuff which is in CityEngine. So one thing which we have is the annotations. So the most important annotations is actually the start rule. So this is something which Pro needs to know what is the start rule. So you need to annotate this start rule. Then you also can give it some here in the parameters. You can, for example, say what's the range of this guy. So let's say 4 to 250 meters. So now when I go in here now, so now I have a slider here. Or what I also can do is now. So yeah, this of course this is just an extrusion, but now what I can do is I can start using other rules. So let's go, for example, in here and search this guy. So we have CityEngine comes with the Esri Lipp. So here are some ready-to-use rules in here. So then there's this building Mast texturizer. So I can now just grab this CGA here. I drag it here. So now I import this guy here, and now when I go to back to my lot here, to my rule, so what I do now is I just extruded this lot now, and what I do now is I create a new shape called mass. And now for mass I'm using a new rule which basically goes which now calls this guy here, this building Mast texturizer. Typically, I think it's just, I have to say generate. So, and I now generate again. It's texturized. So this is so yeah, you can very quickly do something. Then something which is in CityEngine is also you have handles. So this is not yet in Pro. But you can go in here and say, okay, I want to make a handle, and I want to attach it to this mass here. And again, I generate, and now I have a handle here. So now you see, I can, instead of going to the inspector, I can directly operate on my shape here. So yeah. This is very basics, but now we have many operations where we can do pretty cool stuff. So for example, this that's typically parcels are not 100% extruded. So what you have, for example, is actually something more like this. So let's add in here a rule called footprint. And what you now can do is we have an operation, for example, called shape L. And I can go in here and say like, okay, I go 15 meters, maybe 10 meters, and then I go for the shape, and I say here, this is my footprint. So maybe let's go quickly here to the help. So here's the help, CGA, and here you see all the operations which are available, which attributes you can get, stuff you can query, like for example, you can query the angle of your shape and all these kind of things. So there are many operations and functions here. So I'm using now here this shape L, and what I'm doing is I'm basically dividing the parcel into two parts. One is the footprint and one is the open space. So now you see it. So I have now here this typical kind of L-shaped building, and yeah. So the parcel, I see the parcel here is a bit big, which I created. So I make it smaller. Yeah, that looks better. So yeah. So I have now this. Now it starts to look like a real kind of architectural perimeter building, which they are building. Of course, then architects and planners, they often have the width of these perimeter blocks as a parameter. So again, I use here just the width as an attribute, so I can control it with my parameter here. So yeah, so I have now this shape L, and kind of looks like a building. So now let's have a look at what the building mass texture actually provides us. So this is a rule where you can, for example, go in and say like, okay, I want to have a schematic facade or a realistic facade. So realistic facade, I could actually go in here and select here, browse for a texture. If I really want my own texture, I can go in here and, I don't know, select one. Okay, that's more like one for a big building now. or I can go in and say, okay, I want schematic facades, and there I also have many options in here which are already in there. Like for example, I can go in and say like, okay, this maybe like more like this kind of style, and let's make it a bit colorful. So yeah, or maybe it's better to have something like this. So to basically visualize the number of stories. So yeah, so this is all available in here. What's now missing is what's very important these days is always green space. So there's another rule which we have is the plant library. So let's just go for rules here. And again, in the Esri Lipp, we have something called the plant distributor. Again, I just drag it in here. And now I go to, I make a rule here for open space. So currently you see open space doesn't have a rule yet, so it just stops. So that's basically this area here. It just stops. So I go in here, open space, and add here the plant distributor. Again, I think I custom choose generate, and then it does something, I think. Yes. So just generates me here some plants. So here I could actually select that I want to have proper 3D models. Then I could go in and say, now here I get the interface for the plant distributor. So these are all the attributes of the plant distributor. And there I can go in and say, for example, I want to have some tropical kind of area here. and then it's a bit too dense for me, so let's go to 0.5. So this, so you kind of get the idea, and suddenly you are kind of in a visualization space where you are, where architects are pretty, or planners are very happy. And all this is now, these are these few rules here, and you could now create a RPK and use this also in Pro to create this kind of area here. And the cool thing now is really I can, I can change the parcel as I want, and it's really like, it really tries to be, tries to be clever and really, So here, for example, it's interesting. It tries to create really an L shape. So yeah.
Can you wrap it in an inner rect so that regardless, you've also the rectangle inside?
Sure, yeah. So if you want, we have operations like inner rectangle where you can make actually rectangular forms in there, like everything, this kind of perimeter buildings. This is what architects these days do very often, and I think it's questionable if this is actually what we really want in the world. All this kind of perimeter buildings. But what they typically do is actually more something than like this. They don't go directly to open space. They make here. I basically make a sublot rule here, and I call this on the open space. I create a sublot, and now I switch it the other way around. So I make it inside. I make footprint, and the remainder is. So now when I generate it again, so now you see it, then I make here ×2. So yeah, this is typical kind of architecture rules which city planners use or urban designers to really kind of figure out massing and sizes, etc. And still this is all completely procedural. So now what we can do is also on this mass, we just use the, so we can also do stuff as we can create old school roofs. So therefore I make a so-called component split, and I take the top, and on the top I create, let's say, my roof. So it means now I just take the top of my mass, and now I need to write a roof rule. So one hip thing to do these days would be just this. I can place some plants on top of it. So for example, Singapore actually really has to do that. They have laws, so I could do stuff like this. Or I can go in and make actually a proper roof. Let's go here. Let's here with some, let's say 22 degrees and 2 meters overhang. And now I generate, and I think, so now you've got some kind of roof style kind of building. There are different roof types which we have, like gable roof and all these kind of things. So yeah, I like the plans more, so I go back to the plan. Next thing is one special thing which we have in with the new CityEngine 2017 is this is something which is not yet available in Pro, are the so-called local edits. So it means I can go in here and with local edits I can actually just grab this part, make it big, and really create these kinds of visualizations. However, so these are.
Let me just expand on local edits there for a second. Local edits allows you to take anything that's procedurally generated that you've exposed, most usually with a handle, right, and allow you to make individual edits to it. So typically when we've been doing procedural generation, you create a window, all the windows in your building are the same width. Now you can flip to local edit mode and change the width of individual windows. You can change them in Mast vertically, so you can select a kind of a vertical column and change all those in one go, and all that stuff's persisted in it. So it's a huge leap because it really moves it away from being an en masse creation tool to being a creation tool for custom buildings.
Yeah, I can give here. So this is let's make a quick intermezzo to local edits, because yeah. So here I can, for example, go in and say for this floor here, I want to. So here you see I selected the whole floor, and I can go in and say, for example, yeah, make make this floor higher. I don't know. That was the only one. Yeah, here. So for example here. No, it's not working. Try it again. No, they changed something from yesterday. Kind of. It's the alpha version of today, so I didn't test it. Let's try it again. I should have tested this. So yeah, you see the idea is that you actually can really go in for the single building and really change the single thing. So yeah, I demoed that on the other session, but yeah, it's really alpha build. So but the idea is really I can go in and change the actual one building. However, oh no, it works. Weird. Yeah, and it's so yeah, I can very easily create. It's a typical use case where people want to change this one top window. Yeah. So yeah, but that's another story. Let's go back to CGA hacking. So yeah, but now the important part here is actually you get a 3D visualization for your data. However, you also want to have numbers. So what you can do also here, for example, in my Mast rule, I can report, for example, geometry.volume, and when I so I have to say, I have to give it a name. So I say volume here. So when I do this now, and this is pretty calculating the volume of such a thing here. It becomes pretty difficult. So now when I go to the inspector, I can see here the volume. So there are two masses which are basically reporting volume as a value, and then here you see so it's in total it's 50,000 cubic meters of volume. So it means this you can, for example, also use to report gross floor area and all these kind of things. So it means you can really report stuff. This can be energy benchmarks and etc. So we are providing all these kinds of benchmarks, and so that you can then actually really get out of your of these symbols. Also, you can get out reports. And in CityEngine you can use them directly. In Pro you need to apply some Python scripts to actually really use the stuff. So yeah, and once you're happy, you go to your rule. So what is it, rule, CGA? So I have here I think no, it's this one. So I have here my rule, and I go to share as, and now I can create a package. And I can either upload it directly to ArcGIS Online, or I can just save it to a file, and then use this rule package in a way as Eric showed. So yeah, that was my little demo. Perfect.
Okay, I'm going to make you do one more thing. I just made this on the fly. Lots of stuff came out for 2016.0 in CGA. I was curious if you just wanted to walk through quickly what the new
Sure.
functions were. Area split. So one of the functions that we've had is the ability to split. You can split along the scope, the X or the Y or the Z. You can split regularly. One of the things that users kind of were continuously asking for is being able to split by an area instead and give me everything of an equal area or give me everything of a range of area. This is really useful when you're doing parcel subdivision, but it's also useful for other workflows like taking the floor of a building and splitting it into a set of suites or apartments for the interiors. So that's something that we added in 2016. Pascal mentioned in a rectangle. There's two things that were added to that. One is not being able to just get the rectangle, but to get the remainder around it. So you could, for instance, drop a green space rule on it and create a garden around a building. So this was really useful for cities that had a lot of irregularly shaped parcels, but still wanted to be able to generate or create square buildings on a proposed design. The other thing that was cool was you could get the largest rectangle in any shape. So the old inner rectangle, you gave it a scope and orientation and it found the biggest rectangle that fit in that orientation. This will find the orientation that optimizes the rectangle inside it automatically. We added in a bunch of primitives that you can use directly when you're generating a building. There's a great example. We have an effort called Rule of the Week where we're trying to publish one rule as an example every week, and there's a Taj Mahal example where every single shape inside of it was built with a primitive, so there was actually no source shape. And you can control the resolution of those shapes as you insert them depending on your needs. When you're doing insertion of objects, we now honor the native size. We also added some more control over softening the normals, whether you want hard edges, soft edges, all soft edges. And then conform normals, which is that function I mentioned earlier that allows you to clean up a shape. And then coming in 2017 is this context query where the rule can not just know things about the shape it's applied to, but know things about shapes that it's near. So in this case, we have a tree. That tree is figuring out how big its canopy can be based on how close it is to the wall. When it gets too close, it just snuffs itself out of existence. And if it's somewhere in between, it actually is reducing its canopy size. So context queries are going to really kind of open up what we can do for CGA, and it's going to be especially powerful when it comes to writing zoning rules and zoning regulations. Okay, I'm just going to jump back to Pro. Prove it ran. So the only problem was it made 641,000 points, which is why it was taking a little bit of time. But you can see we've taken that profile and split it into these points at a regular interval that we could now use to create a line of sight and do a line of sight analysis. I won't do the construct sight lines because that would also probably take 10 minutes or 12 minutes. Okay, so just some important tips. I mentioned be aware and wary of the assets that you're including in your rule. It's going to try and grab everything that it touches in a folder. There's even some more, I guess you could say, destructive practices that sometimes you can make. For instance, one of the great things to do when you're generating a building is you can tint a texture slightly to create variation. So it's the same texture, but it's got a slightly more green hue. But then when you publish those or create features from those, or if you export all those textures, right, you're going to get a unique one for each variant. So if you use a huge range of colors, you could wind up with thousands of textures and really large RPKs. So just be aware of that. For ArcGIS Pro, you have to designate tags of what kind of input geometry you're providing into the rule so that the GP tool knows what it's expecting to receive. So does it want a point, does it want a polygon, does it want a mesh? So right now it's polygon, point, and mesh, but we have other things that we're planning on adding in the future. Parameters, make sure you have a good name that's going to show up and mean something in the UI so that people know what they're going to put in there. And if you have an existing data model, if you're using the local government data model, for instance, make sure that you're using the same field names. Set your ranges because it makes it a lot easier to manipulate those inside the layer controls. And then if you need to protect your CGA, protect it when you write it as RPK. I'm going to ask, please don't protect your CGA because it's nice for people to see examples and be able to share. The one other thing I wanted to mention is the rule packages can also be used by the SDK. So this is a little plugin for Maya that uses the CityEngine SDK. I can put a rule package directly into Maya and generate procedurally inside Maya using this SDK. So some of our business partners have actually started using this SDK to produce data directly from things they're doing like LiDAR collection, terrestrial LiDAR collection, and then push it through a procedural workflow without actually doing any manual work in ArcGIS Pro or CityEngine. So it's just something to be aware of. If you're interested, you can look at kind of embedding it. Pascal touched on creating an RPK. There's an interface directly inside CityEngine. It looks very much like sharing and the rest of the desktop products. You have that option of sharing up to online, or you can create a local RPK and then share it manually later, or just send it in an email. So just kind of as a summary, right? You write CGA rules in CityEngine, you share as a rule package within your organization to Portal or ArcGIS Online. You can consume it in ArcGIS through GP Tools, in Pro through Symbology and GP Tools, and of course in third-party packages using the SDK. So let's just jump out to ArcGIS and just do a quick search for RPK. So there are a bunch of different rule packages already out there posted that you can use and look at. I mentioned we're doing an effort called Rule of the Week. Right, so they're there we go. So different example rules that we've already published that do different kind of workflows. The last two were these park rules that use a blend of the plant distributor and some other features to actually create parks. So yeah, definitely, if you get a chance and you want to look and play, this is a great place to find and look for example rules that other people have built. And then we're also we're continuing to grow the Esri rule library, the core library that ships with CityEngine, adding new rules to that as well. And we're planning on adding rules to the Esri marketplace as a way to share and actually sell and monetize the exchange of rules. So the big takeaway is, right, rules are not scary things. They're basically building blocks, right? You can chain functions together to create more complex objects, right, with these rules. If you haven't tried CityEngine, I highly recommend going and giving it a download. There's a lot of tutorials on how to write CGA and actually access the different shape grammars and the reporting functions. So there's a lot of good help out there already. There's a forum on GeoNet where people exchange CGA ideas and exchange help. So I recommend you take a look at that. So, and please don't forget, rate our session. And this is, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, email or Twitter. Yeah, for now I want to open it for any questions you guys might have. Yeah?
So in the example, you created a basic rule and then applied some local edits, maybe changed some parameters. Is there a way to export that finished model that you're seeing there directly into multi-patch, for example?
Yeah, so one of the export formats is multi-patch. All the local edits will be honored on export. So yeah, you'll get what you see back as a multi-patch, no problem.
Yeah, you can also create an I3S service in CityEngine, and as a kind of like if you want to share it, again, of course, local edits are in there.
Yes?
For the abstraction you showed, that example of the new version, does that work on all layers, or do you specify which layer it intersects with?
So you specify which layers it's going to be intersecting with. So, no, that's in ArcGIS Pro and the line of sight GP tool.
Okay. I'm thinking the one with the tree, when you have the tree and the fence, you drag the tree.
Oh, no, so he's talking about the context capabilities. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe a little about the roadmap for context?
Yeah, so what you can basically do is you label shapes, so you give them so for example here there was like, you label the fence as fence, and then you can, in your rules you can go and query like, okay, what's my distance to the nearest fence? So, and then you can, based on this, you can react in your rule. So it means it's the rule can differentiate between so because you can label them with strings, that means you can basically control your you can say like, okay, I just label the ones in this block, or you can add the block ID to the label, or so you can basically control what you want to check against in your rule in a very simple way. It's just basically you label your stuff and then you can compare against these labeled things.
So you can constrain by name of shape. Can you constrain by distance as well?
What do you mean with constrain?
So if I'm a tree and I'm looking for the nearest fence, can I say I only want to look at fences that are within 100 meters?
This is happening automatically for you. So you just get back your nearest tree and or fence, and then you can decide if you like this distance or not. So you can make a case statement and say like, okay, if it's too far. So typical use cases again in urban planning is, for example, often they do not have parcels, they have blocks. And it's really like they really work in kind of like bigger kind of volumes, and then what they often have is then they do some very simple subdivision of these blocks, and then at the biggest parcel they place a tower. So but you need to figure out like, okay, which one is the biggest? So because you have many blocks, etc., and then so you can now, for example, make a query like, am I one of the 3 biggest parcels? If so, then create a block, create a tower, and then otherwise just create this kind of things. So these are typical, like, it starts to become really interesting from a programming point of view. You can really start to think like, okay, I can add these context rules about what's around, or so for example, you can do a query like, is there a school near me? If there's a school, then I don't need to create another school, for example.
Read the attributes of the shapes?
That's .1. Currently, what you can do is you can label it school and then ask, what's the difference to the school? But in .1, in the September-October release, we want to actually be able to that you can query the school, and then you can also query like, okay, what type of school is it, for example, and then ask for like, so this is the typical use case. There is the street, and you want to go and know what type of street is it? Like, is it a major street or is it a minor street? If it's category 5 street, then you have setback of 20 meters, and if it's just category 1, then so these kind of things. So you want to know so it's exactly this. You want to know the attributes. Yes. So that's coming in .1. It's going to be pretty exciting, this stuff, because this is like next level thing.
Any other questions?
Okay. As Eric said, just drop us a mail if you have questions, and we are always interested also in getting feedback, and especially now with the new functionalities, and the new CityEngine is kind of like really everything is new basically. So yeah. Thanks a lot.